I am calling this November 2002, a day things changed for myself and my family. Family and life is full of great experiences and sometimes surprises, and sometimes things are not as they appear to be. It was a typical day in November. My children, 12, 10, and twins 8 at the time, were at home enjoying the morning watching their favorite program, The Magic School Bus, and my husband was attending to renovation details in the main bathroom of the home. Life was normal, pretty basic stuff. Normal changed that day. I received a telephone call from an aunt I didn't know existed. She began the conversation rather rapidly, almost as though we were old friends. She suddenly stated my dad had passed away in Terrace, BC. I was so obviously confused and asked for this lady to slow down and explain what she had said. I had no idea of whom this lady was. She claimed to be my aunt, and was further confused as to how anyone would reach me and tell me that my father had passed away. After rather a rough start, the lady identified herself again as my aunt, and she was given my telephone number from my brother, who is a year younger than I, and that someone needed to do something about her dad's body. It was at the morgue in the hospital in Terrace, BC. My first response, I have to say, was one of confusion. I didn't understand why she'd be calling me. This was her brother. This was a man I'd never met. I explained to her I didn't know my dad and had never met him. I didn't know what more I could do to help her out. She indicated to me that it's a sibling's responsibility to handle the funeral arrangements. I, being rather confused, thought to myself, she was a sibling, so why was she calling me? However, she quickly explained to me that it was up to the children to handle the funeral arrangements as far as she was concerned. I am sure I stuttered and stumbled over my words, as I didn't know quite how to respond. I asked if she spoke to my brother and older sister. She indicated she had, and they said they couldn't handle the financial obligation to deal with the funeral and suggested that she call me. Apparently, they had spoken to him from time to time, and she was able to reach them through the information that he had contained on his body. I was unaware of this until this day. The difficult things and thoughts were going through my mind because I kept thinking, there's some poor man's body sitting in a morgue, and no one seems to want to handle the process required to make sure his remains were looked after. Did he have anybody that he loved? Did he share his life with? Did he have friends? Did he have kids? A great deal of questions existed, and I'm not sure if I got to actually ask all of them with that phone call. I took my aunt's information and the information for the hospital, and before hanging up, I reassured her that I would handle the situation and I would keep her posted on the funeral date, etc. Remembering, though, that I had no idea who this lady was. I wasn't close to my father, and I had never arranged a funeral before. The kids were in school the next day, and I went about and obtained the required information necessary to handle the funeral, etc. I remember speaking to the hospital, the morgue, the funeral home, and the only friend that he had in Terrace, BC, explaining that I had no idea what I was doing and that I sincerely appreciated all the help they provided. That day, additionally, I became the executor of his estate. Once I had the date for the funeral, I advised the aunt and my siblings of 5 of the funeral in Terrace, BC. 2 of the siblings chose to go. After all, they had shared conversation with him sporadically from the time that they were adults. From what I remember, my father had very little personal effects on him. There were no pictures, no photo albums, very, very little information. He did, though, have a bit of money in the bank And I remember the siblings all being eager to be in receipt of that little bit of money that he had. I handled the disbursement. Somebody would look at this or listen to this story and they would think, what a horrible thing, you didn't grow up with a father. I had what was supposed to be a father figure. However, I didn't grow up with my dad, my biological dad. It's not a story to be thought of as sad, strange, crazy, weird, or anything like that. Rather, I share it to tell you that I was excited to learn in November 2002 that my father was Métis. It sort of filled a void that I had growing up. This is something that my mother never discussed with me, and as a matter of fact, my mother often refused to talk about my father. Absolutely refused. Having said that, hindsight is 20/20. It comes to play in this situation as well. I remember when my mother would get angry at us and make statements about being half-breeds. I remember asking her once what that meant. She said, "No one will ever call you half-breed since your father isn't here." Understanding my heritage based on my father's side of the family became necessary for me to pursue. At this time, I was 40 years old, and this dirty little secret was well hidden for decades. I tried to reach out to his siblings. They just wanted to move on with their respective lives. They didn't want to take a trip down memory lane, nor did they want to discuss the past and the relationship with my father. Perhaps intergenerational trauma may serve as a reason. Having lost the opportunity to speak to my father's family, and certainly my mother not wanting to discuss it, other than to state that she loved him once, I felt that very important pieces were still missing. I have learned over the course of time that my grandfather's father worked for the Hudson Bay Trading Company. My grandfather was married twice. His first wife passed away due to illness. He was also down east and eventually moved to Fort Chipewyan, Alberta, where my father was conceived. My father grew up in Fort Chipewyan and eventually moved to Kimberley, BC, where he met my mother. He worked for Cominco Mines and worked for the sawmill in Canal Flats, BC. From there, I have no idea exactly what happened, with the exception of knowing that he ultimately ended up in Terrace, BC. What is important here is to understand that the history, traditions, culture, and language of the Indigenous communities are at risk of being lost. The experience and the story that I tell about my father is a clear indication of that. If our younger generations are not sharing and communicating with elders of these communities, and we have aging elders passing away without sharing knowledge, it's a reality that can't be overlooked that we are going to be missing out on some very valuable knowledge and information. I personally would have loved to know my history, the traditions of the Métis people, and the culture, so I could be sharing this valuable knowledge with my children, family, friends, and co-workers. I hope this story will encourage people to share an audience with the Indigenous community and to learn, accept, respect, and honor a people who have been in Canada far longer than Western European settlers. I further hope that policies and promised reconciliation continue so extinction of culture, heritage, and language isn't forever lost. Thank you.